Psychopaths and serial killers, they and their crimes are horrifying and repulsive. They're predators who lie, manipulate and murder with no remorse, nothing.
Behind bars, they've left a legacy of chaos, crime and chilling violence. These are the world's most dangerous women, whose deadly actions shook the very foundations of society. From masterminding gruesome plots to committing unspeakable acts of revenge, their stories will leave you on the edge of your seat. Curious to know what doctor over woman Joanna Deny to go on a murder spree, or how Amelia Carr got revenge on her ex-fiance's girlfriend? Stick around as we dive deep into their dark, twisted tales. You won't believe what happens next. Celeste Carrington.
The suspects at the Floridita murders is a female drug dealer.
You won't believe how Celeste Carrington's spree of violence unfolded, leaving death and terror in her wake. Who is she, and why does her name still send chills down spines? Celeste Carrington isn't just any criminal, she's one of only 15 women in California sentenced to death.
It's a good thing to tell her I had the peace of mind to get the plates, so when Miami PD put out an APB, I got a hit.
Her conviction in 1994 marked the first time in 53 years that a California woman received the death penalty. So, what did she do to earn this infamy? Her story begins with tragedy, but quickly spirals into something far darker. Born to abusive and impoverished parents in Philadelphia, Celeste's life was marked by unimaginable suffering. By the time she was 14, she endured unspeakable abuse at the hands of her father, who impregnated her. Seeking a fresh start, she eventually moved to California, seemingly turning her life around. She attended college, excelled in sports, and even competed internationally in shot put. She later moved to East Palo Alto, found love with a woman named Jackie, and worked cleaning office buildings. But lurking beneath this veneer of normalcy was a storm waiting to erupt. In late 1991, Celeste's life took a sinister turn. Fired for stealing checks from her janitorial job, she didn't just walk away, she left with stolen office keys. Her first major crime followed in January 1992, when she broke into a Dodge dealership. Armed with a crowbar, she stole cash, electronics, and, most disturbingly, a .357 Magnum pistol. What came next would cement her name among America's deadliest killers. Her first assassination occurred on January 26, 1992.
Miss Blanco, I'm Detective Hawkins. This is Detective Singleton.
Let's get you back to Miami, shall we? I know you miss it.
Using stolen keys, she entered a shoe factory and triggered an alarm, drawing the attention of Victor Esperaz, the custodian. Pretending to be there for a cleaning job, she disarmed his suspicions before pulling out her gun, robbing him of $145 and forcing him to his knees.
I'm gonna tell every dealer in Miami not to touch it.
Despite his compliance, Celeste coldly shot him execution style, later admitting she felt powerful doing it. But her reign of terror wasn't over. On March 11th, she struck again at a real estate office in Palo Alto. There, she cornered property manager Caroline Glion, robbed her, and, just like before, executed her in cold blood. Days later, Celeste attacked pediatrician Dr. Alan Marks, shooting him twice. Though he survived, Celeste's trail of destruction left 2 dead and countless lives shattered. By March 20th, 1992, Celeste was finally arrested. Evidence in her apartment linked her to multiple crimes, and she was convicted of 14 charges, including 2 murders and 1 attempted murder. In 1994, a jury recommended the death penalty, and she now resides on San Quentin's death row, fighting her conviction. Celeste's desire for fame drove her to become a real-life monster, but every female criminal doesn't have to work that hard. Joanna Christine Dennehy. What if we told you about a woman whose killing spree sent shockwaves through England? And frankly, her rap sheet would put El Chapo himself to shame. This isn't just a story of crime, it's one of chilling motives, a twisted sense of thrill and utter chaos. Meet Joanna Christine Dennehy, the face behind the infamous Peterborough Ditch killings.
Attempted murder.
You might think you've heard it all, but her story is unlike any other, and trust us, you'll want to stick around for this. Joanna's story begins in St. Albans, Hertfordshire, where her life took a dark turn early on. She left home at 16, running away with an older boyfriend, and had 2 children by him. But life spiraled quickly. Alcohol, drugs, and mental health struggles consumed her, leading to the loss of her kids. By her own admission, she lived in what felt like a never-ending nightmare of mental and emotional torture. But what came next was even darker. She moved to Peterborough, where her life took a violent and sinister turn.
A serial killer, psychopath, and pathological liar. Joanna Deny described herself as a monster.
Her first victim was 31-year-old Łukasz Slabojewski, whom she had bonded with over while partying and taking drugs. They had only known each other for a few days when she lured him to a house under false pretenses. There, she stabbed him in the heart and casually disposed of his body in a dumpster. But for Joanna, this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. She later admitted that after this, she had developed a taste for killing. Her second victim was 56-year-old John Chapman, a housemate in the shared accommodation where she lived. Just like Łukasz, John didn't stand a chance. Joanna ended his life with brutal efficiency and left his body in a ditch. With no sign of remorse, she moved on to her third victim, Kevin Lee, who also happened to be her landlord and her lover. Despite their personal relationship, Joanna saw no reason to spare him. In an especially twisted act, she had him wear a black dress before taking his life and left his body posed in a shocking, degrading manner.
But I would survive because it was like a river of blood.
But how could she overpower multiple men? That's where her accomplices, Gary Stretch Richards and Leslie Layton, come in. They claimed they feared her, describing her as a force of nature they couldn't resist. Together, the trio set out on a road trip of terror, attacking random strangers, including 2 dog walkers. While one man was stabbed 40 times, both victims miraculously survived, though Joanna and her accomplices had even stolen one of their dogs. Joanna's spree came to an end after Kevin Lee's body was discovered and police began questioning her. She fled but was caught within days. Even in custody, she shocked investigators by casually admitting her life came to an end because it was fun. Her bizarre behavior, flirting with officers and setting arbitrary rules about not harming women with kids, only added to the disturbing nature of her crimes. Today, Joanna remains behind bars, serving a life sentence. But even prison hasn't dulled her taste for chaos. From romantic flings with other inmates to plotting an escape, Joanna's story is one of relentless destruction and chilling arrogance. Deny is the first woman to be sentenced to death by the judge, who described her as a cruel, calculating, selfish, and manipulative serial killer after she murdered 3 men. Mr. Justice Spencer determined that Deny's actions were so terrible that he became the first judge to sentence a woman to life in prison after a dramatic hearing at the Old Bailey in central London. During the court, Deny grinned and spoke with several of her 3 accomplices,
One mark for attempted murder and murder,
who were also condemned. The judge revealed she had told a psychiatrist that she killed to see if I was as cold as I thought I was. Then it got Moorish, and I got a taste for it. The judge stated that Deny had sent him a letter expressing no sorrow for the killings, but claiming some for the attempted murders, which she blamed on drunken cruelty and lack of respect for human life. Back in 2019, her daughter, Shianne Treanor, talked to the Daily Mail and revealed that she found out on the internet that her mother was a triple murderer. After visiting her mother in prison for the first time, Shianne spoke of the emotional roller coaster she had been on, growing up in the shadow of a heinous criminal. Speaking to the Sunday Mirror, she said, "I was told nothing about my mum and I wanted answers. She deserves to spend the rest of her life in prison. I'm sorry to the victims. I can't imagine what they went through." Rebecca Butterfield. In October 2024, it was revealed that Australia's most notorious and dangerous female inmate had been quietly released from jail despite being mentally unstable, prone to fits of extreme violence, and vowing to kill again. After the release, she was immediately admitted to a secure forensic hospital, where she would receive ongoing treatment for a range of severe mental health disorders as an involuntary patient. However, the locals are not happy about this. Once dubbed one of the most dangerous women in Australia, she spent years behind bars for a reason. Her violent outbursts and terrifying reputation have left authorities desperate to keep her locked up. But how did she go from a petty criminal to an infamous figure feared by all? It all started back in 1997 when she was first incarcerated after attacking a taxi driver. Instead of paying her fare, she stabbed him.
Got a plug at which I yelled because I walked out the front door to go out to my car.
3 years later, she escalated her violence, stabbing a neighbor who tried to stop her from harming herself. But those incidents were just the beginning. In 2003, her violence reached shocking new heights. Inside a prison, she used a kitchen knife to stab a fellow inmate 33 times, leaving gruesome wounds all over her body. That act alone earned her a 12-year sentence, but her time behind bars was far from uneventful. Despite being eligible for parole after 7 years, Rebecca never got out. Prosecutors were relentless, fighting to keep her locked up because they knew just how dangerous she was. In prison, Rebecca's violent tendencies only worsened. She attacked prison guards, medical staff, and fellow inmates with shocking brutality. On one occasion, she threw hot tea and her own colostomy bag at a guard. She even scalded another inmate with boiling water and tried to harm a nurse. These actions only confirmed what everyone feared: Rebecca had not changed. She was still as violent and unpredictable as ever. Mental health professionals have weighed in too, painting a terrifying picture of her psychological state. Diagnosed with antisocial and borderline personality disorders and possibly schizophrenia, experts have warned that she should remain isolated. If released, they fear she could harm anyone in her path, especially if she's not under constant surveillance. In fact, Rebecca's former psychiatrist called her the most dangerous woman in Australia, and other doctors agreed. And just to seal the deal, Rebecca herself has made it clear that she's still a threat. After a violent encounter with a doctor, she allegedly said, "I will kill when I get out." Those words have haunted everyone who's heard them, and they've only added fuel to the fire of concern. If she's ever released, there will be tight restrictions, constant monitoring, an ankle bracelet, and a ban on weapons. But will that be enough to keep her from unleashing her violence once again? With a history like hers, it's hard to say. What's certain is that Rebecca Butterfield is a force no one should underestimate, and the Aussie authorities are better off keeping her locked up. After all, what she did cannot be forgiven. Catherine Knight. This sense of dread and unpredictability is echoed in the story of Catherine Knight, another woman whose shocking past places her among the most dangerous criminals in history. Catherine Knight, an Australian woman with a dark and twisted history, is one of the most notorious criminals in the country's history, right up there with the most dangerous. Born on October the 24th, 1955.
Introverted and kind of like a loner and stuff. She would have these like outbursts where she would just go into a fit of rage.
Her life was steeped in scandal from the start. Her parents were involved in a scandalous affair that led them to start a new family far away from the drama. But things didn't get any better. Her father, Ken, was a brutal man who reportedly violated Catherine up to 10 times a day. The violence in her home shaped Catherine into a rebellious, angry teenager who was constantly getting into fights. By the age of 15, she dropped out of school and found a job working at a meat abattoir, where she learned how to cut up flesh and bones, skills she would later use in ways that would horrify the world. It wasn't long before she married a co-worker, David Stanford Kellett, and their marriage turned violent. Catherine tried to strangle him, hit him with a frying pan, and even put their baby in harm's way. She didn't stop there. She went on to date David Saunders, another man she abused with a similar fury. Then came John Price. Catherine's relationship with John was as toxic as it gets. They fought constantly, and she even got him fired from his job. His friends distanced themselves from him as they saw how destructive she was. In February 2000, the violence escalated to new heights. John took out a restraining order against her after a brutal attack, but the nightmare wasn't over. Later that month, he came home to find his children sent away for a sleepover, leaving him alone with Catherine. That night, the two of them went to bed, but while John slept, Catherine launched a savage attack. She stabbed him 37 times with a butcher knife, and he died from his injuries. But Catherine wasn't done. Using the skills she'd learned at the abattoir, she skinned his body and hung the skin on a hook. And if you think that's the end, think again. She cooked his flesh, served it with vegetables, and even planned to feed it to his children. Catherine left his head simmering in a pot with vegetables, a note next to it that sent a chilling message. "Time got you back, Jonathan, for forking my daughter. You to be for Ross, for little John now play with little John's John Price." It was a grotesque, sickening act that left everyone stunned. When John didn't show up for work, his co-workers grew worried and called the police. Catherine was arrested, and her horrifying crime shocked the world. She pled guilty to taking John's life, and given the brutal nature of the crime and her lack of remorse, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a first for a woman in Australia. Despite attempts to appeal, she remains locked up in Silverwater Women's Correctional Centre, where she will live out the rest of her days. Krista Pike. The case of Krista Pike is both chilling and tragic. Krista became the youngest woman in the US to be sentenced to death in the post-Furman era.
And further, on the 12th day of January 1997, your body shall be subjected to shock.
After she took the life of 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer in 1995 when she was just 18. Pike's background was troubled. She dropped out of high school but enrolled in a Job Corps program in Knoxville, Tennessee, in hopes of turning her life around. There, she became obsessed with dark themes like the occult, and her relationship with her boyfriend, Tadaril Shipp, who shared these interests, only deepened her involvement in dangerous behaviors. Tensions escalated when Pike believed that Colleen was trying to steal her boyfriend. Despite Colleen denying the rumors, Pike plotted with Shipp and their friend, Shadola Peterson, to take revenge. On January 12, 1995, they lured Colleen into the woods under the guise of making peace, only to brutally attack her. The assault was horrific. They beat Colleen senselessly, carved pentagrams into her body, and finally smashed her skull with a chunk of asphalt. Pike even took a piece of Colleen's skull as a grisly trophy. The crime was discovered after Pike showed off the bone fragment at school, leading to a police investigation. Evidence, such as the fragment, along with the fact that one victim left, but only 3 returned, sealed their fate. Pike was charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, ultimately receiving a death sentence by electrocution. Despite numerous attempts to appeal, Pike remains on death row, continuing to make headlines with her violent behavior while incarcerated, including a 2001 attempt to strangle a fellow inmate. Krista Pike's case remains a highly debated and controversial example of youth violence and the death penalty in the US. As of now, her lawyers continue to fight for her sentence to be reconsidered, but her past actions, both inside and outside prison, have made it difficult for her to gain any leniency. Ana Marie Hernandez. Talk about making a dark mark in history. Then there's Ana Marie Hernandez. This woman's beauty and glamorous lifestyle earned her the nickname Lamona of the Doll. But don't let her looks fool you. She's got a dark side. Hernandez was no ordinary woman. She was a ruthless drug dealer with connections to some of the most dangerous cartels. Her partnership with her husband, Daniel Lesmer, a Customs and Border Protection officer, led them down a deadly path, one that included taking bribes to help cocaine smugglers sneak their deadly cargo across the US-Mexico border. They used their power to manipulate border routes, smuggling drugs into major cities like Chicago, Miami, and St. Louis. Hernandez blended in effortlessly with her high-class lifestyle, all while pulling the strings of this illicit empire. But as the saying goes, all good things come to an end. Eventually, the authorities caught on. Hernandez was arrested, pleaded guilty, and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. But that wasn't the end of her criminal career. After attempting to escape to Mexico, she was caught and extradited back to face her fate. Then, to make matters worse, she was hit with more charges in 2023 for wire fraud and impersonating a federal employee. She had been scamming undocumented immigrants out of their money, promising them fake US citizenship services. If convicted of these latest charges, Hernandez could face an additional 20 years behind bars. This woman's life is a dark roller coaster of deception, crime, and betrayal. Antoinette Frank. Now let's talk about someone who was supposed to be upholding the law, but ended up breaking it in the most shocking way. Antoinette Frank, a former New Orleans police officer, was far from the hero we all expect. Frank joined the police department in 1993, despite concerns about her qualifications. But as the police force struggled with staffing issues, she was hired. Unfortunately, she didn't improve, her performance was lackluster, and she nearly got sent back to the academy. But it wasn't until November 1994 that things took a sinister turn. Frank started a relationship with a dangerous drug dealer named Rogers Lacaze. Together, they hatched a horrifying plan that led to a brutal crime. On March 4, 1995, they walked into a Vietnamese restaurant in New Orleans, where Frank's fellow officer, Ronald Austin Williams, was working part-time. Using a stolen key, they snuck into the back and ambushed Williams. Lacaze shot him in the back of the head and then shot him several more times. But that was just the beginning. Frank and Lacaze turned on the Vu family, demanding money and taking the lives of 2 family members before fleeing the scene. The chilling twist: Frank heard the police radio call and came back to finish the job. But this time, justice caught up with her. She was arrested, and both she and Lacaze were indicted for the murders. Although Lacaze's sentence was reduced to life in prison, Frank remains on death row to this day, the only woman in Louisiana with such a sentence. Emma Coronel. Hold on to your seats, because this story is about to take a wild turn. You've heard of women doing crazy things for love, right? But nothing quite compares to what Emma Coronel Ispuro did for hers. The wife of infamous drug lord El Chapo, Emma's journey is one for the books, full of beauty, scandal, and a trail of controversy. Emma was no ordinary woman. She grew up in the US and was the daughter of one of El Chapo's top men. A stunning beauty queen from a young age, she captivated everyone's attention. But the real twist: she met El Chapo at a beauty pageant and, in an insane twist of fate, got engaged to him the very same day. Yes, you heard that right. They got married sooner after, and by 2011, they had twin girls. However, El Chapo was on the run, and his name was all over US wanted lists. They even left their daughters' birth certificates blank to keep things under wraps. But here's where things get really spicy. 3 years later, El Chapo was finally captured after evading authorities for over 13 years. Emma stood by him, showing up at court every day, passionately defending her man and begging for justice on national TV. Now the big question: how deep was Emma really involved in his empire? Was she just a loving wife or a key player in the notorious cartel? Many believe Emma was far from innocent. In fact, rumors swirl that when El Chapo was locked up, she was the one passing messages and orders, keeping the empire going while he was behind bars. But that's not all. When he escaped from prison, she may have been behind the messages that helped orchestrate it. It's hard to believe she wasn't aware of the dark world her husband ruled, especially considering she pled guilty to serious charges of drug distribution and money laundering. In 2021, Emma was sentenced to 3 years in prison for her part in her husband's criminal empire. But just when you thought this thriller was over, in 2023, she was released early. Now, Emma is living in Mexico with her daughters. And get this, she still allegedly has ties to the cartel, even though her husband is locked up in a supermax prison. Amelia Carr. In 2009, a chilling and brutal crime unfolded in Florida, set in motion by a twisted love triangle and a vengeful obsession that led to a life-altering tragedy. Amelia Carr, a mother of 3, was locked in a toxic relationship with Joshua Fulgham, a man who had once been her fiance but left her to marry another woman, Heather Strong. The love triangle quickly escalated into something much darker when Joshua, now married to Heather, resorted to violence and threats, pushing Amelia to the edge. Despite the broken marriage, Amelia remained involved with Joshua, and tensions boiled over when he assaulted Heather and was arrested. In a desperate attempt to gain control, Amelia threatened Heather with a knife.
Did he tell you that?
I was under the impression that she left him because she was coming back. She's left and came back so many other times.
No.
Urging her to drop the charges against Joshua. But when Heather refused, the situation turned deadly.
Heather wanted to leave with the kids. Josh wouldn't let that happen and was also very angry he had just spent time in jail.
Amelia and Joshua concocted a plan to permanently remove Heather from their lives. 7 months pregnant at the time, Amelia lured Heather into a secluded storage trailer on the property of her mother's house under the pretense of a meeting. Once there, Heather was forcibly tied to a chair, suffocated with a plastic bag, and left to die, while Joshua stood by, assisting in the cruel act. It wasn't long before police discovered Heather's lifeless body in a shallow grave.
That you told him that you guys took care of Heather, and for him not to worry about her anymore.
And an investigation quickly unraveled the horrifying details. Amelia, whose loyalty to Joshua ultimately led her down this treacherous path, had been using Heather's credit cards after the woman went missing. A breakthrough came when Joshua, during questioning, led police to the location of the body. Eventually, the confession came through a recorded conversation with Joshua's sister, in which Amelia admitted her role in Heather's death.
Want me to keep kids, but when she gets it cleared up, she's coming home. Heather always coming home.
The courts didn't take long to reach a verdict. Amelia was found guilty of kidnapping and first-degree murder, and despite her pregnancy, She was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Joshua, too, was convicted, but his fate was a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Amelia's sentence was later reduced to life in prison after a retrial in 2017, sparing her from execution but ensuring she would remain behind bars for the rest of her life. This tragedy, fueled by jealousy, betrayal, and violence, underscores the extremes some are willing to go in the name of love and revenge.
So you telling me Amelia knows, she knows everything?
I think she knows more about the shit than I do.
The case has become one of the most disturbing reminders of what can happen when toxic relationships spiral into uncontrollable chaos. We hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for more amazing stories.